We have an update on LaMelo Ball's status heading into tonight's game against the New York Knicks. And what is Brandon Miller's role without LaMelo Ball? We'll get to all of that today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, somebody that we use for buzz, bet the buzz, kind of every now and again when we have enough money. We appreciate that. We can score early this NFL season with FanDuel. It's back. It's
holiday money.
That's right. It is America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. That's David Walker joining us as he does every Tuesday. You can find him on Twitter at David B. Walker. That's Doug Branson. Check him out on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. And I'm Walker Mayo. Listen to me every weekday on WFNZ, Sports Radio 92.7 FM from 12 to 3 p.m. Okay, David, you're back. We are discussing a LaMelo Ball injury once again, right? It hasn't happened this season. It happened a lot last year. Unfortunately, we saw him go down in their most recent game against the Orlando Magic. Now, he's listed as doubtful heading into tonight's game against the Knicks. That's his status so far. I would say, given what happened, that airs on the side of positive news. We got a tweet from Spencer Percy of the Buzzbeat podcast. He said, source, X-ray was negative, so LaMelo Ball and the Hornets avoid fracture to the right ankle that was surgically repaired in February. MRI scheduled for today. He had that tweet yesterday. We'll see what kind of information comes out, whether LaMelo will be available against the Knicks, and if he'll be available this week, next week, who knows. But certainly a bummer. I guess with the question for LaMelo, David, how much faith do you have in this team without him going out there on the court? And what are some ways they can combat his absence?
Well, the things they have going for them this time around, guys, are they have more live bodies. I mean, for one, they have a Miles Bridges. For two, they have a Brandon Miller. And that's two guys they did not have at all last year. They did get Terry back. And they've got Mark Williams and PJ Washington. So, they've got the bulk of their core, their starting lineup, their top six, if you will. The problem is, of course, there's just not any depth at all at the point guard position. So when you lose LaMelo, you lose any real strike force from that slot. And it's LaMelo, guys. I mean, he was playing at an all-star level, probably an all-NBA level over the last month, and was really, really, really in the groove. And it stinks to see that now. I know no one hates it more than he does. I know there's been a lot of talk about ankle braces and tapes and screws and metals and stuff. But bottom line is LaMelo does not want to be hurt. No one does. But he's not going to neglect anything, I don't think, that's going to help him get back as soon as he can. I saw a lot of people feel good about the doubtful designation. And just to say this is kind of what we've seen, though, from the Hornets, right? I mean, anytime they put something out there, it's usually, super vague, super broad. And it's certainly better to see than out. But we all think, regardless of, if there's no serious injury or things that show up on the MRI, that he will be out for at least a little bit. So, I mean, there's no way he plays tonight, I don't think. But again, they've got other guys that can step up. And number one, I'm looking at Brandon Miller, who's averaging 20 points against the Knicks this season in 5 quarters. So, that's his team. So hopefully he can continue that.
Yeah. What do you think some of the ways they can combat this loss are, Doug?
I'm honestly not really sure, because if this were a team that were a lockdown defensive team that could hold a team under 30 points for a quarter without trying really, really, really hard, then I would say, okay, yes, I would agree with David. They've got some offensive pieces such that they can attempt to replace at least the 30-plus points that he was giving you on a nightly basis. I don't think they would be necessarily successful, but I think they could attempt it and then have enough defense to maybe survive some of these games. But I highly doubt they're going to be able to do that unless they, decide suddenly to wake up. And I think Steve Clifford is attempting through these post-game press conferences and through, I'm sure, his communications with the team to try to wake everybody up and say, hey, listen, now maybe we have to play defense. With LaMelo out there scoring 30-plus points, maybe you thought you didn't have to play defense super hard. Now we actually have to. So this Knicks game will be a big test for them to see if they've gotten that message without LaMelo Ball. I agree on David's thoughts on the doubtful designation. I desperately want to take that as positive news because it isn't out, but it also isn't any kind of indication of what the injury was, what the MRI revealed. If they did the MRI yesterday, what did that reveal? I think the Hornets go with doubtful until they are definitive on what something is. And I like with Terry. I think Terry Rozier was doubtful that first game after his groin injury. And then, now, he missed 9 games after that. So I just don't think we're going to know definitively until the Hornets say something. Now, if the Hornets don't say anything at all, that would actually be positive to me because I think they tend to only say something when it's like, oh, yeah, that's a fracture. Oh, yeah, that's going to keep him out for months. So if we don't hear anything, maybe it is going to be a Terry Rozier situation where he misses, 5 to 10 games and then comes back.
Yeah, I joke about it all the time with the injury designations that the Hornets release. What I learned, I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe it was 3, that a probable could absolutely mean a no-go. And I was talking about this before we hopped on the mic. I would do a blind bet, not knowing anything else about other NBA franchises and what their designations turn out to be. I would go with a blind bet and put my money on the Hornets for leading in the probable actually outs that ever happen each game. That's how it works. We're really in a limbo with LaMelo at this point. We don't know when he's going to come back. I'm hoping that he comes back sooner. I think what we can say is that we didn't see anything bad. I think if LaMelo was going to be out indefinitely, this is a bad injury, this is what you can expect, I think we would have received that information, right? So it goes to the tune of what you were saying, Doug. It is nice that they're not telling us anything. It means there's not anything so important where it's like, well, okay, we're going to tell you, like, or we got to tell you now because he's going to miss 6 weeks with a, whatever, right? With a bad ankle sprain, something like that. At least it seems like we're avoiding the 6-week-long absence from LaMelo. Hopefully that's the case. What you got?
Right. But we also saw him having to be helped by 2 people off the court, not being able to put any pressure on that ankle. I mean, I think that's concerning, and that tells me, hey, that's probably not going to be a 1 game and back in. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, we don't know. I would prefer to know. I would love to know, but this is the team that we have, and we know how this team operates with these kinds of situations. So that's what it is. But look, other players got to step up. I think it is good that they have Terry Rozier back. I mean, this would be truly apocalyptic if Terry Rozier weren't back in the lineup, but he is. And he showed it right from the jump in that last game against Orlando. There was no rust. He had a lot of rest, not a lot of rust. He was able to get to the rim at will, put pressure on defenses, not necessarily put pressure on a team with his defense, but he can put pressure on defenses. He's going to have to do a lot of that and a lot of facilitating. I think he had 9 assists, maybe more than that by the end of that Orlando game. So we know he can pass too. So there will be an attempt to replace what LaMelo gives you, and we'll see how successful they are against New York tonight.
Davey, you have any final thoughts?
Well, the defensive side of it, right? I can just picture Jalen Brunson just bully-balling Ish Smith or whomever they try to put on him. Maybe they'll throw Bryce McGowan's at him. Well,
he bullied Brandon, right? I mean, Brandon was his matchup when he was when Terry was out and he was alongside LaMelo, and Jalen took Brandon Miller to school. So we'll have to see. Do they figure out a way to get Terry on Jalen this time?
Oh God! If you put Terry on him, I mean, how is Terry going to do both things? How is he going to guard Jalen Brunson and then be asked to score on the other end? It's a big ask. I think just the last thing on LaMelo, like some positive signs that we see. If he's even in New York, that's probably a positive sign. I don't know that he will be. If there's traveling, there's no point, and he's not doing shoot around or anything. So we'll see. Still a lot of things to be determined. You're right, though, Doug. We can't take anything really away from anything. Because we just don't know. People react differently to pain, to precautions. So the fact that he was carried off certainly isn't great. But hopefully we'll continue to get some good news. And to that point, did we hear much of Terry coming back prior to him actually being on the court? I don't know. Maybe we didn't. It was kind of like, oh, here we go.
No, it's one of those things where you see him shoot around and everybody gets excited. You see him at practice and everybody gets a little bit more excited. Then you see him doing shoot around before a game, and then people get a little bit more excited. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Terry's back.
Yeah, well, and that happened with PJ. We thought, okay, Leaky Black is getting recalled from Greensboro. PJ Washington probably going to miss some more time, but then to our surprise, he actually didn't. He was ready to go. So the Hornets are going to surprise you with these things. They've done it for the last few years. You can never know when somebody is returning from injury and when somebody is going to be out. By the way, James Bouknight, something to note there. Yeah. James Bouknight is on his way back.
Well, that means he's out.
Yeah, we don't know. That's right. I just went against my way of thinking with the Hornets. And unfortunately, just as we're doing injury updates here, Nick Richards continues to be out in concussion protocol. I guess it's the same thing for the NBA as it is the NFL. But there are, I did look into this. Yeah.
It is the same. There are like levels that you have to hit, tests that you have to pass before the NBA clears you. And we got some indication several games ago that Steve Clifford saying he was quite a ways away from being able to clear all of those hurdles. I mean, he took a pretty hard whack to the old noodle. So, it's difficult, especially when you don't have a third-string center. Okay. I mean, when you're throwing Miles Bridges and Thor out there at backup center against the Knicks, this might be a tough one.
It's going to be. I think if you're looking for a crack in the wall there for like peaks of what may be news for LaMelo, I think it does come from Clifford, because like when people ask him about that, he will say stuff like that, like it's going to be a while, or
hopefully someone says something about the MRI. I mean, I think we should get some kind of answer on what the MRI showed.
Well, and to your point, David, he let us know on the Kyle Bailey show about Cody Martin. I don't know how long ago it was. It wasn't too long ago, where he said he's not close. He said he's trying, but he said he's not close. It was a year ago,
and it was also last week.
That's right. Yeah. Copy and paste. That's what it is. Yeah. All right. We'll end the first segment with Whack to the Old Noodle. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
I teased it yesterday. Brandon Miller, what kind of primary ball handling responsibilities is he going to have now that LaMelo Ball is out, assuming that he's going to be out against the Knicks tonight and maybe even longer than that? We'll get to Brandon Miller's role, his different role, in just a little bit. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. When we bring Bet the Buzz, I'm hoping to win $150. That would be great. David had the potential biggest earning with some kind of parlay. He could have won 20. Of course, we lost it, and now we're hurting a little bit. So we need to figure out a way to get back on track. But it's not FanDuel's fault. It's our fault. It's users' error. It is Chat GPT error. It is ping pong ball error. And we're going to try to figure it all out so we can win some money for not ourselves, by the way. We're going to try to donate this money to charity. We just got to do the whole get money thing. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, even more than that. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets coming up. I was thinking about it, man. We really need to get back on it with Bet the Buzz. We were so excited about it.
Bet the Buzz.
We're 15 games in, and we've skipped a couple.
Gut punch.
It was right out of the gate. It has not worked out for us, but we are going to bring it back at some point. You said you found an interesting line on this game, Doug. What's the prop or the line that you want to tell the people?
Well, yeah, this would not be the game to Bet the Buzz, or maybe it would be if you want to make some money, because they are an 11.5-point dog in this game against the New York Knicks. So if you did put a bucko down, you could make a little cheddar if they do come out with a miracle win. But the line that I wanted to point out was their to score 10-plus points bet. Would you like to take a guess really quickly at who they have as the most likely player to score 10-plus points?
I don't know. I'd say I'd say Miles. If we're going with the Hornets, I guess Miles would be the next guy. That would make the most sense to me.
No, I would say Miles too.
Well, you both are incorrect. Right now, you can get Terry Rozier at minus 8,000. Okay. I mean, he is to score 10-plus points by a wide margin. R.J. Barrett at minus 1,900. Brandon Miller at minus 410. He's number 3.
All right,
I don't think Vegas is taking into account the tear that Miles went on in the Garden like 2.5 years ago or whatever. They totally forgot that. So maybe that's a steal.
So Brandon Miller up there. Brandon Miller, we know he's been playing very well. What he's been doing the last few games, it's been fantastic. I'm trying to bring up his game log. I have some advanced stats that I want to get to with him in just a moment, how he's affected the lineup. He scored 20 against Orlando. He scored 15 against Washington. The three-point shot has been there for him the last couple of games. That's come and gone. It's not necessarily worrisome, but it's just come and gone throughout the beginning of his season. But the last 2 games, he's really been shooting the ball well, 50% from the field in each of the last 2 contests. Also, 5 rebounds against Orlando, even got to the line. So without LaMelo, David, do you want to see Brandon actually run the offense a little more so, having Terry still be that guy as the combo guard? Maybe in half-court possessions, you're still giving it to Gordon Hayward. Mm-hmm. But Brandon is somebody that was drafted because he does have that playmaking ability. I think if you're looking for him to get to the rack, that hasn't been happening a ton. You see a lot of him stopping mid-range to get by until he gets some more weight, until he gets more explosiveness off the dribble. We've seen him take off and almost, land on dudes' heads. Like we've seen a few of the almost dunks that are absolutely nuts. But what do you think about Brandon Miller being a guy that could lead the offense a couple of times tonight?
Yeah, maybe in spot situations. I mean, he's also gotten into a little bit of trouble with over dribbling in a couple of these games recently, especially like towards end of games situations. So maybe not the most ideal things for him to, try and be or be asked to do in those specific situations. Can they run some of the offense through him, like in a Gordon-like way? Probably. That'll be interesting to see, because he really did step up once LaMelo went out in that Magic game. Like I said, against the Knicks, he's been on fire, averaging 20 points for the season, and he went out in that first game in the first quarter. So he's shooting like 70% from 3 against the Knicks, which I'm just going to say, if he does that for the rest of the season, it's got to be some kind of record.
It's going to be good.
And so, that's another piece of his game. It does feel a little early for him to do that, just because we haven't seen it, right? I mean, we haven't seen it to success here with the Hornets, and they've got other guys. Like if they were to the point of asking him to do that, you'd be bypassing, like you mentioned, Gordon, even Terry, and even Miles, in my eyes. So like in spot situations, maybe, but I think that would be a last ditch scenario for the Hornets to ask Brandon Miller to run a ton of the offense.
What do you think, Doug?
I think they need to bypass Gordon Hayward. I mean, this guy, I can't with this guy anymore. The bad turnovers. He's not hitting the mid-range shots. Like if you look at his numbers from like short mid and long mid, they're awful. And that's really his entire offense nowadays. And so if that's going to be awful, that's like double awful in today's NBA if you're going to take a lot of mid-range shots and miss a lot of mid-range shots. So I think at this point they should start bypassing Gordon Hayward. But I agree with David. This is going to be, with LaMelo out, this is going to be the Miles Bridges and Terry Rozier show. It's going to be very similar to what we saw last season when it was the Terry Rozier and Kelly Oubre show. Similar, and that's where all the offense is going to go. Different in that Miles Bridges is a very different player than Kelly Oubre was. I think they'll have a little bit more success with it than they did last season. But I think Brandon Miller is still better as sort of a second option on a play. You saw it against Orlando when he had 11 points in the third quarter, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Like he can pour it on in a quarter, but you saw it like with 9 minutes to go. I have it here in my game notes that the Magic denied a Mark Williams, Miles Bridges give and go, and then Mark immediately DHOs to Miller and opens him up for an above the break 3. That's like a perfect Brandon Miller second option play. I would expect to see more of that than like running him through the offense. But in transition, give him all the opportunities, because that's when he's getting to the rim. That's when he's most effective, is when he has a running head start. Because you're right, Walker, he's not necessarily a guy who's going to get to the rim at will. That's Miles' job. That's Terry's job. That's not necessarily Brandon's job. He's going to have to score, but he's going to have to do it shooting outside. And they're going to need him not to score 30. He's not going to fully replace LaMelo, but they need him to go from like 11, 12 to like 15, 16.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at a few Brandon Miller lineups where, of course, a lot of them include LaMelo Ball, a lot of the lineups that he's played this season. But if you look at one Brandon Miller lineup that does not include LaMelo, that has, I mean, at least some minutes played, 30 minutes, 28 to be exact. They're plus 11.7 with Gordon Hayward, Brandon Miller, Terry Rozier, JT Thor, and Mark Williams out there on the floor. If you replace JT with Miles Bridges, that would be the idea. And that right now is a plus 11.7 lineup with Thor. And if you place him with Miles, that would be pretty good. And that's where, like, okay, you have Terry, Brandon, and Gordon as your three playmakers within the offense. All of them are going to get a shot. It would go Terry. Even still, Gordon right now, if you look at pick and roll possessions per 100, so it's Gordon at like 3.5 per 100. It's Brandon at 2.5. If you want to bypass Gordon because he's struggling, if you would like to see Brandon get involved a little more in the pick and roll with LaMelo out now, then maybe this goes up a few possessions against the New York Knicks, especially with the way that he's been shooting. Or do you just want him to float and, okay, for some reason he's going off against the Knicks? We had the one quarter the night in Madison Square Garden. Then we had the one full game this past time out. Can we get another nice showing where, hey, we're just going to have you do exactly what you were doing without LaMelo? I don't think you can do that because LaMelo is a special player. He's the only guy that can help you. So I'm interested. I expect it to go up a little bit, and I wonder exactly how he can get everybody else involved with him having some primary ball handling responsibilities. Like at least in the future, I never thought that this was going to be his MO, his rookie season, nor should it be with LaMelo or some of the other talent, even Terry on the team. As much as I don't love him facilitating, he's still a guy that's going to take care of the basketball more so. But in the future, yeah, you draft Brandon because you want his usage to be sky high. That's the second overall pick. That's the archetype perimeter player that we all see when you draft him first or second overall. So maybe we experiment a little more with that tonight. And it'll be interesting to see, especially against good defense like New York and Tom Thibodeau doing the crazy defensive strategy that he'll throw Brandon's way.
Yeah, and also I hope he can stay out of foul trouble. That goes for basically everybody in the starting five, and it's a must. I mean, we didn't talk about it. We were talking a lot of offense in that segment, but my God, guys, if you look down the schedule, this Hornets team has not been able to stop anyone the entire year. And that goes doubly for the Knicks. You know, they're scoring 120 plus points on them both times. The 3-point percentages, for the Hornets were not great in the first game, but they weren't terribly off track with what the Knicks were doing. They were pretty much even in the second game. They just can't stop them. Even at home, even with LaMelo trying to outpace them on offense, they've got to come up with some ways to get some stops. Don't let Quickly get going. Don't let these guys for the Knicks beat them up inside and just, you have to score, but you got to get some stops too. So Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, they're key guys that have to stay out of foul trouble early.
And I wonder defensively too, if these guys do have to step up on that end, then it's the classic. Do you take away some production on the offensive end? That's why when we were discussing Terry, it's just a lot. He's had to be the hero so many times, especially last year where the shooting percentage, it went down. But who else were you going to go to? I mean, it's PJ Terry. Now it's Brandon, PJ, Miles is back. So now maybe you can divvy that defensive responsibility up and throw a few more guys at Jalen or whoever. There's some options, though. It's a good point, David. So, yeah, we'll see. 11.5 point spread in favor of the Knicks. I understand why, and maybe the Hornets can make some noise in there.
What's that over? Maybe we can make some money on that over, Doug.
That's true. That's right.
Last thing for me, Mark Williams. We haven't mentioned him this segment. He's got to be way more physical. I mean, he's got to beat up on Mitchell Robinson. Tough task, I know, but going to have to see a lot more physicality out of him, especially. I mean, he's going to play a lot of minutes too. You would think with and I saw him on the bench with his shoulder wrapped up. I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah.
Is there a lingering injury there? I mean, if they lose Mark Williams, like Walker, when they get back from this road trip, you might have to suit up. They just need a tall guy.
Oh, yeah, that'll be great. I will absolutely keep up the blocking of the shots that Mark Williams has been doing here lately. And that's been good. We've seen the physicality come and go, but he's picked up a few fouls, but 3 blocks against Boston, 3 against Washington, did at least record 1 against Orlando in just 22 minutes of game time. The rebounding, 16-15 in a couple wins, 6 against Orlando, yet 22 minutes. But you're right. Like you're just hoping for some consistency as Mark Williams learns his way in the NBA. Let's move on. One more segment to go. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
All right, the Carolina Panthers were in the news all across the board yesterday. We'll try to find the local angle. With Frank Reich being fired from Carolina, is there anything to maybe hint at for Steve Clifford with Frank Reich's firing? Could we see another professional franchise in Charlotte fire their head coach after this season or before season's end? We'll get to it in a moment. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers, and instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. Now, I have been telling you to most likely go with the over Adam Thielen receptions or go with the more than, Adam Thielen or the actual LaMelo Ball 3-point field goals made. You would have lost that bet. So I apologize for telling you to go more than. But
you got to bet the Panthers.
But what's good about that is even if LaMelo gets hurt, you're hoping that he comes back, very quickly. But Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy platform that offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, the player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/LOCKEDONNBA. Go LOCKEDONNBA and then use code, same thing, LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. More Locked On Hornets ahead. The in-season tournament finale tonight against the Knicks. Yeah. David, I know, I feel like the in-season tournament was a success for the most part. I liked it. Awesome. Yeah, I thought it was really cool. What were some of your thoughts, and what are the odds here for the Charlotte Hornets to potentially extend their in-season tournament playing?
Yeah. First of all, the fact that they're still in it, guys, on the last night of the tournament, I mean, I think it's a huge victory. There's plenty of teams that are out, that have nothing to play for except point differential or whatever. So the fact that the Hornets have a slim chance to backdoor their way into a wild card entry into the next round or whatever. They obviously need to win tonight. Then they also need a Cleveland loss. They also need a Miami loss. They also need a Boston loss, and let's throw a Brooklyn loss on top of that too.
I have no more fingers.
And they would need to then finish second place in group and wins tiebreaker over any other second place team from other group. It's a long shot, guys, is what I'm saying. I think there would need to be some whiteboarding and some red string involved for them to get into this. But hey, they're still on it, and it's the last night. It's Tournament Tuesday. Let's enjoy it. It's been
Tuesday.
Glorious.
Yes, Tournament Tuesday. That'll be fun. Hopefully, all of those things can happen, and this thing can continue for the Hornets. Okay, Frank Reich fired from the Carolina Panthers. To put that in perspective for people, Frank Reich has the second shortest tenure of any NFL coach in history if you include a regular season game having been coached that year. Bill Belichick had the infamous or famous, depending how much you like Bill Belichick. He had the one-day job with the Jets before retiring and going to the Pats. And then I think one guy coached a couple of games for the Rams and then was done in 1978. It was preseason. So, yeah, Frank Reich fired very quickly. What hit me yesterday was I saw somebody tweet that Urban Meyer lasted longer. That was a shock to me. That really put things in perspective. Okay, We are not that far into the Charlotte Hornets season. But, David, I'll start with you. Steve, it's not been a great start. They got a couple wins against the Celtics and the Wizards. It's not an awful loss against Orlando. You have some injuries you're battling. All that being said, what are the chances Steve Clifford does not last through the end of this season?
Oh, well, gosh, if it comes to that, I hope he does get fired, because otherwise I think he's going to explode on the sidelines at some point. Like, his head is just going to combust because there's no defense being played, and he's literally not going to be able to take it. I would be surprised if he doesn't make it to the end of the season, though. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what the point would be, unless you know you're going to do it and you can find some people to come in or conversations start to happen. But as long as guys are healthy, as long as LaMelo comes back, as long as they're, get a few wins here and there, I think this has always been another gap year into whatever the next ownership group wants to do. And that probably includes a new coach. But I would guess, just for coming in and being a solid team guy, he may be able to finish out the season if he wants to.
What do you think, Doug?
This is not an ownership group that has set themselves up as like a rock the boat ownership group. Tepper is very much that. Like his whole personality is, I'm gonna do whatever it takes, and I'm gonna do it now. Like that's not how Rick Schnall and Plotkin set this whole thing up as. So I would be surprised if he did get canned mid-season. And he has some built-in excuses already with the injuries. It's interesting because he's a coach that I think is generally liked and respected by the players. They're just not listening to him. Like, there's no discord. I haven't heard players frustrated with Steve Clifford. He also doesn't have anyone on the bench right now that I would look at and go, ooh, that could be a guy that they could go to if they just wanted to shake up the roster a little bit. That's a guy that could maybe inspire them, figure it out, and then maybe somebody that they could look at as an interim. And, he doesn't have like a rock star assistant coach, right? I mean, it's a bunch of guys that are, former assistants with Steve Clifford on other teams, a lot of older guys. So you don't have that factor either. So all of that to say, it would surprise me, although I will say that Rick Schnall was in attendance during the last game against the Knicks in Madison Square Garden, because I think both of those guys are, hedge fund guys who spend a lot of time in New York. So if they're in attendance for another big blowout of this team, I get it. LaMelo Ball's out. Maybe they are reasonable people that say, okay, LaMelo Ball's out. That's why they got blown out. But maybe not. You just never know. I think the whole theme of this show is you never know.
Well, and so it's funny you bring up, I was thinking about the assistant coach thing. Ty Corbin has some ties to having been a coach in the NBA before, so that could be a guy if you wanted to. If you wanted to go young and innovative, maybe you would roll out Nick Friedman. If Summer League tells us anything, as much as Marlon Garnett might be LaMelo's guy, I don't think Marlon Garnett is the coach that you want out there in Summer League, especially with the way Brandon Miller wasn't performing well. A lot of people put that on the coach. You would not want that. I agree with you. I think it makes sense for Steve Clifford to stay the rest of the way. And I think the owners would agree with that it makes the most sense for Steve Clifford. There's not a Jay Triano, the veteran that actually is kind of innovative in idea with James Borrego. If Borrego's gone, then it's Triano. There's anybody that screams, hey, I'm ready for this, at least to get you to the end of the season. So I would agree. And we'll see if Steve Clifford, that's the question to me. It's not, does he last for a second year after this one or a third total, his second stint? It's, does he last through the end of the year? And I do think I'm in a pretty solid place where he'll last through the end of this season. And then Rick Schnall, Gabe Plotkin, they're going to move on and try to find a different coach and a different GM and clean house for the most part.
I hope that search is starting now. That's what I would hope. Less so that anyone gets moved in the middle of the season, because I think at this point it's not really going to result in something significantly higher than you would if you just stayed the course. And so I think all I hope is that process of trying to put feelers out for certain guys or scouting certain coaches is already happening. And then the next level of that is, I hope if you have a guy that you want, that you go out and get that guy and you make sure that whatever that guy wants, that guy has, so that you don't have another Kenny Atkinson debacle.
Yeah, pay your assistant coaches, people. Rich Schnob, okay, you're rich, all right? pay your assistant coaches. Gabe Plotkin, pay the assistant coaches. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks to David Walker hopping on with us once again. Find him on Twitter at David B. Walker. Doug Branson, check his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com, and listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Thanks for making us your first listen. As always, we're free and available anywhere you get your pods. We will recap what could be the in-season tournament finale, unless all those things that David said happen, and then maybe we could talk about it a little bit more. But we'll recap the game against the Knicks tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.
It could happen.